Hello, this is Lauren Carr, and welcome to Authors on iTours, a podcast devoted to authors, book bloggers, and other book lovers alike. Hello, welcome back to Authors on iTours. Today we are interviewing the award-winning novelist P.J. Murphy. P.J. Murphy writes novels that introduce unusual and humorous twists to classic genres. If you pick up one of his books, you're in for an interesting read that never loses its sense of fun. As a writer, P.J. tries to stick to the adage, write what you know. Although, with the addition, just make sure you exaggerate and distort it beyond all recognition. He is planning to write a novel about taking a road trip with a parrot. He has never owned a parrot. Be sure to check out our links below for his website and social media.
And so, Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about Dead Letters? It is a mystery. Tell us a little bit about the plot for your book, and how did you come up with this idea of Dead Letters?
Okay, well, it's a story of a author who has been missing for about a year, and actually exactly a year after his disappearance, manuscript of his final novel shows up, and his old friends realize that within it there are clues about what happened to him. So it's a story around trying to follow the novel within a novel and try and unlock the different clues in there about what's really happening in real life. And it kind of, it came from various different places. The novel within a novel, which is also called Dead Letters, is a ghost story. So and it follows a couple of children who are going and trying to find and release ghosts in what Second World War Britain during the war. And that was really, I think, largely because I wanted to write ghost story and try and do different unusual settings for ghosts, unusual takes on ghosts. And it ended up being kind of within the main story itself. So it kind of provided an opportunity to try and build some parallels in there between what you might see in a ghost story and what might have happened in real life. Of course, real life is also another story, but that's essentially where it came from.
Now you have the protagonist is a very good friend of this best-selling author who's disappeared. I read in like the first chapter, it sounded like they had been college buddies, and then there's also the ex-girlfriend who the author had given given them his last manuscript to. Is the tell us about the protagonist, and is how much of that is based on you?
That's a big question at the beginning. I think it's obviously the story is written in first person as well, so it really lends itself to that being me speaking. I think I think when I write first person, a lot of me is in it, but it's not supposed to be me. It's a character who is quite isolated. He's really separated himself from his friends and the connections over time.
And you never really explained how that happened. Is it just that he's sort of a loner, or he seems kind of shy?
I'm not really sure. I guess it's just one of those things that just happened over time. He's described as really being into his puzzles, and his work is trying to untangle why you get kind of traffic hotspots and queues in motorways and things like that. And so he, I think, just gets completely subsumed in that and kind of forgets about everybody and everything else until his friend goes missing, and then he, of course, suddenly feels very guilty that he's basically abandoned him and forgotten all about him for a while.
Yeah,
But
I noticed that you said that he hadn't seen him in years, and he felt kind of bad about it, and he didn't even really want to talk to anybody at the funeral. And the girlfriend reaches out to him.
yeah, and I mean, I think there's an attraction where he kind of wants to know what happened to his friend, and I think there's also the puzzle element there. It kind of appeals to that part of his personality where he wants to work out what happened. And his ex-girlfriend, I think, is also wants to know, but she's also quite. She's called Amy. She's quite traumatized by kind of a breakup novel that the author wrote after they broke up a few years ago. So it's kind of described as a bit like a breakup album, but as a novel where all the dirty kind of linen gets washed and everything. And so she's none too keen to read the new novel that surfaced, but it was delivered to her with a note in it which is says, "If you want to find me, look within these pages." So it's kind of an invitation to delve into it. So she seeks out Nick, our protagonist, at the beginning of the novel to really try and get him to help so that she doesn't have to do this by herself.
Did you ever have a friend, sir, like this novelist who, or was he totally by imagination? How much of this is the characters? How many are the characters that you actually have in your life, or are composites, or
I mean, not really. I think there are certain traits of different people I know, including myself, in the different characters. I think the story came about more because kind of like a puzzle in itself. So I mentioned I started off with a ghost story. And then the other element of the story that came together was because this is the fourth novel that I finished. And when I had shared previous novels with people, one of the first things they asked is kind of similar to actually what you're asking. Is what's the true life behind what I'm reading? And I thought, well, actually, there's a story in there around, okay, well, what is the true life within that? So that's kind of how the different pieces came together. And I mean, I'm not sure how much more I can say without spoiling it either, but there are
yeah,
also
we don't want spoilers.
fair enough. I'll just say there was some real life inspirations around what, famous authors and what has happened to them and how they've dealt with fame and age and so on, that kind of all came together to kind of inspire into that character.
Now, this is your second book. You also wrote a Troubleshot. Was that a mystery?
No, it was completely different. It was a satire. So Dead Letters is written, as I mentioned, in first person. So there's quite a lot of humor in the narrative. And so there's that continuity there. But Troubleshot was written because I used to work in the charity sector in the UK, and it was one of those things where you always say, "Oh, we should write this up. It would be an amazing book." And eventually I did. So again, it's not exactly reality, but a lot of what happens in that book is inspired by things that happened during my time working in the charity sector. It follows a village that is falsely identified as a trouble hotspot, and they're actually all completely fine in the village, but everyone descends on them to help them out and solve all the social problems that this village doesn't have. So it plays off that in terms of the comedy.
Oh, okay. So it's not a mystery. So you hopped to a totally different genre. Now, you said you started out Dead Letters wanting to write about a ghost story, and it turned into a mystery. So you've written satire. So what are you working on now?
Yeah, I'm a bit of an amateur in terms of genre hopping. I think it's generally advised to try and stick with the same genre. But what I try and do is I try and take kind of standard genres and try and put a different twist on them. So I've actually got a book coming out early next year, February next year, which is actually the one that I finished just before Dead Letters, but I had kind of shelved it, which is a coming of age drama, I guess I would call it, about a teenager who's the reluctant savior of a homeless man set in Cambridge in the UK. So it's really firmly literary fiction. There's a bit of humor in there, and it's, as I say, it's coming of age. And
Is it
for the,
YA, young adult, or is it
I think it could be read young adult. Yeah, I didn't specifically do it as that, but certainly some of the readers that I've had have said yes, this would really appeal to anyone who's been there and is trying to kind of work out life and what to make of life, because it's a character who's struggling through various different things, including his parents separating and so on. And yeah, and again, it's written in a similar narrative voice to Dead Letters. Actually, at one point, I considered it being the same character. I didn't go with that in the end, but it was key in developing the voice that I would then use for Dead Letters. So but I've been encouraged to dust it off, and that will be coming out in February, and then my next projects, which hopefully I'll get done next year. I have a couple in mind, but one is a sequel to Troubleshot, so another satire that will be based in Geneva, actually, where I'm now living, and so there's definitely a real life inspiration there. And I have a kind of spy novel that's a bit like a twist between Bond and Groundhog Day, the Bill Murray film that I'm quite keen on writing as well. So again, a genre, but a different take on it.
Mhm. Oh, well, and there are some authors who do the genre hopping. Now you, going back to Dead Letters, Dead Letters does have a World War II element because these two children in the fiction book, the manuscript, are from World War II. So that's some historical. How did you research this book? It sounds like you had to do more research on this book than you did with Troubleshot or the one that you're working on now.
But
How much
that's true, yeah.
how challenging, or how did you do the research for that?
Well, I mean, growing up in the UK, and particularly in schools in the 80s when I was at school, I don't know how much it's still the case, but the Second World War was really part of the curriculum anyway. It's very much part of the national consciousness, and you had grandparents that were alive during the war, and of course that's changed now. But anyway, a lot of my consciousness of that era was there from that. I'm actually a historian. I studied history at university, okay. So there's that background as well. But essentially, I actually forget what I did now for research. It's been such a while. It was always very specific, actually. One of the chapters, there is an abattoir in it, a slaughterhouse, and I had to do some very grisly research around, well, what were they like during that period? And yes, and finding that out was very interesting. Actually, it was a lot of internet research more than anything. But yeah, I think I tended to delve into very specific items where I just wanted to have it realistic about, okay, at the time this is what it would have been. I also didn't worry too much about. I wanted a certain level of historical authenticity, but I also a little bit played on the idea that this is a novel within a novel. So I tried to write that novel within a novel with a different tone, with a different narrative tone, and kind of sprinkled a few errors in there.
Yeah, and you have humor too. You got a good mix of humor in there too.
Yeah, I try. I think one of the things, this isn't a huge spoiler, but one of the things that comes out fairly early on is that the children in the story, in the manuscript, are effectively the main characters perceived through the writer's eyes, through the missing writer's eyes. So it gives something quite humorous to play off, where you can see what you've seen or who you've just seen, but with a different slant on it. So that's something I liked to play around with. There's also I think one of the main humor elements is the fan club of the missing writer. I tried not to go too much into stereotype there, and try and make sure I had fleshed out characters there, but you kind of have a little bit of a bunch of misfits there who are really obsessed with the worlds that this missing writer developed. He was a fantasy writer, so he really was developing very detailed worlds that people would kind of live in, and they're obviously very disappointed that he's finished, because he's now not producing more books.
And it isn't so much that he's dead, it's just that he's not producing any more books.
Yeah, I think that's as far as the level of care goes, I think, in some
Yeah.
of the cases.
Ah, well, so what is going to be the title of your next book that you're coming out with? Your YA?
That's called Yesterday's Shadow.
Yesterday's Shadow, and that's coming, that you're looking for that to come out next
It
year?
will be, yeah, I think it's already up on Amazon for pre-order. It's the 20th of February that it'll come out. So
Okay. And right now, Paul, you're on tour with Dead Letters with I Read Book Tours, because you won an award with Page Turner Awards. So
yes, I did. Yes.
so that's an award-winning book. Your award-winning Dead Letters is on tour right now with I Read Book Tours. And we will have links below for everyone to buy your book.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for stopping by, PJ, Paul Murphy, author of Dead Letters, a great mystery, and I encourage everyone to check this out.
Thank you for joining us at Authors on iTours. If you enjoyed this episode, then do give us a like and a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe so that you can receive notifications of future episodes of Authors on iTours. In the meantime, happy reading!